you're tuning in from, pop in the chat. Where are you from? We'd love to hear from you. As you're doing that, please feel free to settle in, grab some water, grab some coffee, grab some tea. Today, we're going to be diving into the evolution of NLI's Summit. This is our annual conference that we've been holding for nearly 2 decades now. We're going to talk about, how it came to be, and then we're also going to be giving you a sneak peek of this year. So please, get comfortable, get excited. Wow, we've got some amazing different places: Florida, New York, Pennsylvania, Florida, New Jersey. This is great. NYC, fabulous. As you're getting settled in, I'm going to go ahead and bring our illustrious and fearless leader and co-founder, Dr. David Rock, on with me. David, as you know, is no stranger to Your Brain at Work Live. He founded and coined the term neuroleadership 25 years ago. David, welcome so much. It's so great to be back with you here.
Thanks, Alyssa. Great to be back. And what a fun conversation. I was thinking, this isn't just about our summit. This is actually a conversation about designing any large-scale event, whether it's a conference or a leadership retreat for your organization, which are really back in vogue again. So hopefully you'll get some insights about kind of designing large events overall, as well as a preview of the summit and some of the history.
Amazing. Thanks so much, David. And audience members, as a reminder, please feel free to pop your questions in along the way or your comments. We love making this as engaging as possible. So David, let's dive in. This will be your 19th summit since 2007. I would love to hear, how did you get this annual powwow started? What's the backstory?
It's a long story. I'll try and keep it short, but it's kind of a fascinating story as well. And in many ways, it was an accident, which sounds funny, but it really was kind of an accident. So I wrote the first piece on the neuroscience of leadership in 2006. It came out in Strategy and Business magazine. It was called The Neuroscience of Leadership, and it explained how attention changed the brain. And leadership was about focusing attention. And it became one of the biggest ever pieces for Strategy and Business magazine, and went in their kind of best ever publication, all this stuff. Maybe my team can put it in the chat, but it was an impactful piece of my career. But one of the people that reached out to me was a university in Europe somewhere that I'd never heard of. And they said, well, we're a business school, not the psychology school. We're trying to teach self-awareness to our future leaders. We don't want to use psychology. We want to use neuroscience. We think you can help. And of course, really neuroscience is psychology and neuroscience together, but they wanted to use much more kind of physical ideas for developing their leaders at this business school. And I get a lot of emails all the time with bizarre random things, and I was like, yeah, that sounds firstly crazy and amazing and scary and wonderful and wow. And then I was like, oh, where are you guys? And they said, oh, we're actually in northern Italy, just north of Venice, in the mountains, in a 1,000-year-old town. I'm like, maybe I'll look at my map. Oh, look at that. I'm going to London in 2 weeks. Do you happen to have a few days spare? And literally 2 weeks after receiving their note, I went to this little business school, and over one of many long Italian dinners, we all, I think it was October, September maybe of 2006. And over one of these long dinners, we all agreed it would be incredible to get together all the people I'd been talking to over the last, at that point, about 5 years, all the different neuroscientists that I'd been talking to, as well as business leaders, and just kind of talk about, is there possibly a concept called the neuroscience of leadership? And we all agreed that we would host this event at their venue, which is this beautiful mountaintop in a little town called Asolo. We managed to get 50 people together, some really influential people, still connected to a lot of them. And we ran the first summit. We actually filmed the whole thing in HD, and it's available. It's around. It's a high value item on eBay, I think. But we actually had some incredible people. We had Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz, who's one of the world's experts in neuroplasticity, and he was my kind of mentor and research partner for a number of years. And he brought along Henry Stapp, who's a world famous physicist, who helped us really understand the physics of attention, and a number of other people. And it was in this kind of converted church, and just, it was this really powerful idea. And I assumed that, sort of they could run it the next year, or we'd run it somewhere else, but no one was kind of picking up the event to run it again. And we thought, well, we'll try and run it. This is 2007. The next year, of course, 2008, we go to run it in New York City. The whole financial crisis hits and it nearly destroys our whole company. It was really, really scary. But we ended up running it in New York in 2008 and also in Sydney that year, and where I'm from. So that's kind of how it started. And we sort of saw there was so much interest in the topic that we literally kept running it from that moment on.
So did you go back to Oslo, or where have you held it since? Have you rotated?
It's actually Asolo, not Oslo. Asolo,
Oslo.
A-S-O-L-O, easily confused with Oslo in Norway. But Asolo is a little mountaintop that looks like Venice, but on top of a mountain. We haven't been back there since, although I visited many times to collaborate with them. The university is called Chimba, and many of their students come to work with us, and a great school. It's a study abroad university. But we haven't been back there, but we moved it around for a long time. So we went to, we did it in San Francisco so that we could tap into kind of that network of scientists, and we had some amazing guests there. We did it in Washington, D.C. to have more of a government focus. We did it in Boston one year to tap into that network. We did it in New York a few times, I think, and then we did one in LA that was really interesting. But we moved it around, and then about 5-6 years ago, we said, let's keep it as a home in New York. Because that's just slightly more scientists and more people kind of want to come there. So it's been there. That's been the home ever since.
Great. I'm curious, audience, if you've been to one of our summits so far, pop in the chat where it was and when. We'd love to see that. And if you haven't come, we would love to invite you for this year, which we'll talk about later. Okay, so we got the backstory. Let's fast forward to the 2009 summit. You had mentioned that this was a pivotal change in terms of the design of it. Talk us through sort of what you mean by that.
Yeah, it was a really fascinating experience. So I'd been connected through someone I met again. I think it was actually someone who read that first article again, The Neuroscience of Leadership. Someone read it and wrote to me and said, they're a leadership expert. And I looked them up and they seemed to be a lot more kind of influential and connected than I was. And I had lunch with them in LA one time when I was there, and they said, oh, you should really meet Warren Bennis. Warren is, really interested in your work, and he'd read your work. And I was like, wow, Warren Bennis is the superstar in the leadership space. He is incredible. He's passed away a few years, but he was still, quite active in those times. Anyway, fast forward, I met Warren, and he was really excited about the work we were doing, which kind of blew me away. And I was like, Warren, we'd so love to have you at our summit. Like, can we get you at our summit? And he says, look, I would do anything to be there, but I'm 80 something now, and I absolutely don't fly anymore. And in an instant,
you can't blame him for that. I mean,
no, he was, I think it was 85 even. He was a little bit frail and really taking care of himself. I said, you know what? If you promise to come, I'll move the summit to literally down the road from you in LA so that we can have you in the program. And he was like, hell yeah, let's do it. And we looked at the dates and the venue, and we literally ran the summit in LA, just by UCLA, right near his house, just so that Warren could come. And in hindsight, it was one of the most wonderful things that we ever did, because what happened was, until that point, we had these incredible scientists kind of coming and telling their story for, an hour or an hour and a half sessions, right? We had, Marco Iacoboni talking all about mirror neurons, and we had, Matt Lieberman talking about, social threat, and we had his partner Naomi Eisenberger talking about social reward, and we had, all these amazing scientists come and sort of describe different elements of the brain as it might relate to leadership. And what happened was, in 2009, and by this time we'd run about 5 events, because we did a couple of years sometime. And what happened was, about midway through, not even midway, about 15 minutes into, I think it was Naomi's presentation, Naomi Eisenberger from UCLA, Warren basically stood up and said, can I have the microphone? And we're like, we moved the whole conference for him. How are we going to say no, right? So we gave him the microphone, and Warren said, look, everything you've said is amazing, but you're about to start moving on to another topic, but I haven't yet got my head around the last topic you just explained for the last 15 minutes. Can we pause for a minute and just kind of talk about what all that means? Like what that means for leadership. You're talking about, this really complicated thing. And he basically asked her a few questions and sort of had this to and fro, and literally made sense for the whole room. There's about maybe 200 people there. He literally made sense for the whole room of what the science meant for leadership. And this went on for about 10 minutes. And then he said, thank you. And he sat down and Naomi kept talking. About 15 minutes later, he did it again. He put his hand up. He said, I think we need to pause again. And we did this again. Anyway, we ended up doing this the whole rest of the conference. And we realized that this is literally what the brain needs, particularly in an interdisciplinary like idea like this, right? You're trying to connect different fields. If you're going to present research, you need to actually think about, what does that mean, right? What are the implications of that? How does it affect leadership? And so we literally made that a design principle of every event since, as well as every large conference we design, as well as all the learning experiences we design and everything. And it all came from, that event with Warren, may rest in peace. And so and we call them digestion points, right? And we weave them in. And essentially it's like, it turns out attention is about 15 to 20 minutes before you need to pause. So when we did our attention research in 2010, we were like, oh, that's why Warren was doing that. That's the natural flow at which you need to pause and digest. We found you could do like a sort of panel discussion between themselves, or you could get the audience to just talk amongst themselves, or you could give people an activity, or you could do Q&A, but that could go longer. But what we found was sort of anything that changed the way people's brain was focusing and kind of was more integrative, would enable that chapter to be kind of tied up in a bow and move to the next chapter. And there's been a lot of research we could sort of dig into, explains why that works and how that works. But memories are almost like a room that you sort of leave one and go to the next. But anyway, that's what we found. It was super helpful to do. And then we used that principle of about kind of 15 minutes before if you're just talking at people, before people digest and apply.
That's so fascinating, particularly as, we look at the deluge of content and information and just go culture that we have these days. To be able to have sort of that reflection point is really, really remarkable. So you mentioned Jeffrey Schwartz, Matt Lieberman. Who are some other sort of luminaries and people who you've collaborated over the years that have influenced you and been, a crucial part of Summit?
I mean, one of the fun things with moving it around is we're able to kind of look for particular people we wanted to work with and kind of eventually get to them. So, from San Francisco, we had some amazing people. We collaborated with Phil Zimbardo, who's quite old now, but he was the Stanford prisoner experiment guy, which is kind of controversial now, but he developed this thing called the Heroic Imagination Project, which was about developing heroes, which is really kind of the ally mentality now as well in organizations. But he really sparked our thinking about kind of developing, positive change agents inside organizations, and a fascinating character. And we had Carol Dweck several times. It really helped us think about growth mindset and develop our whole organizational growth mindset, perspective. Her amazing research about kind of mindsets are about intelligence. We came to see mindsets could be about anything, could be about musical ability or, coding ability or anything. So, but having her there was really fascinating. We had Ellen Langer, who's one of the big mindfulness practitioners, and John Kabat-Zinn from mindfulness, and a number of the big mindfulness researchers as well, like David Creswell and Jeffrey Schwartz and others. So that really helped us. And Warren and quite a few others. But it was a number of the sessions really influenced our thinking. Probably one of the biggest ones was Bob Keegan, who's a fascinating professor from Harvard. He got us really thinking about the asking for feedback idea as something to really study, and we ended up doing all this research on that. So a number of things have emerged from sort of having conversations on stage, and then a whole field of research has emerged that's followed years and years afterwards.
That's fascinating. That's really cool. There are plenty of conferences out there. It's a huge industry. You read plenty of articles about, do this, don't do that, best programming practices. What do you think people get wrong when they think about how to design a conference? We already talked about sort of the space for reflection, to be able to ask clarifying questions. What else do people get wrong when you attend other conferences and see sort of what doesn't work?
They're mostly awful. Like when I have to go to speak at a conference, I know the participants, it feels like a zombie town. Like you go to the SHRM conference or some of these other big events. It's just
watch out, you're not going to get back. You're not going to get invited again, David.
I won't, will I? Sorry, SHRM people. But they're designed. I mean, once you're at a level of 15,000 people, it's really difficult. But still, there are principles you can follow. But the change management would be hard at that scale. So it's much easier to design a new event, like a leadership retreat you're designing this year. You can, use these principles, but big, huge events, it's harder to do this. But there's a couple of things. Firstly, everyone sort of thinks that there's this unconscious bias, and it's an expedience bias that basically it's all about making what happens on the stage really, really powerful. So that the whole kind of mental model is people in the audience don't matter. It's the stage that matters. So we've got to get the most incredible things happening on the stage, right? And the most ideas, the most incredible speakers and all this. But people don't realize it's what happens inside people's heads that actually is delivering value. And, if the lights are down in the room and the lights are on the stage, people are literally, they're checking out, they're not interacting with neighbors. They're literally, some of them are falling asleep. And
we've all seen pictures of that.
Right. It makes people be watching television, right? You're not necessarily activating the most energy in the brain by just watching something, right? And so when we design an event, we'll design specifically for people to digest and apply. So the last thing we ever want to do is like rows of people. We'll do tables, ideally tables of 4 or 6, or at the very most 8. We try and do 4 and 6. And then have these digestion points throughout. Now, the wonderful thing is a lot of the learning comes from what happens on the stage, but a lot of the learning comes from conversations with other people about the topics, right? But most events, you talk to like 1 person, 2 people, 3 people, like the whole event, you sit next to 1 person for a whole day, right? If they're not that interesting, you're done. At this event, you're like moving around 4 times in the day, and you'll talk to everyone at your table each time, multiple times. So the quality conversations you have with other highly intelligent people are like 10 times, maybe 20 times what you'd have at another event, because we're not designing the learning for what happens on the stage, right? We're designing the learning for what happens at your table and in your brain. So we're designing for the brain, not designing for the stage, right? The second thing is, there's a lot of things. But the second thing is just that, there's this feeling like we have to sell tickets. So we have to have lots and lots of topics and lots of names. And it's got to be super, super attractive, right? And you want people to look at the program and go, I have to be there. Then they actually arrive and they go, oh my God, I can't be in 10 places at once. And they get so much FOMO that it's kind of exhausting, right? So it's this weird dynamic. One of the things we do to address that is we'll film and record everything, and attendees can actually watch any session they missed, afterwards. But what happens is you just get overwhelmed and it doesn't fit together, right? So we did this. We actually helped Microsoft design their big leadership retreat to launch the leadership principles that we worked on with them. And the brief that we saw kind of before we designed it was, we've got 600 people, we've got 2 days. We're going to have lots and lots of tracks with lots and lots of amazing speakers and lots of ideas, and people can go and move around and create lots of energy and lots of buzz. And we're like, that's a terrible idea. That's a terrible idea. They had tables of 10 and an amazing list of speakers. And we're like, that's a terrible idea. We're going to do tables of 4. And we just immediately lost them. They said, that's 150 tables of 4. Like, how are we going to have 150 tables? And we looked at the math, looked at the floor plan, looked at the size of the tables and said, actually, easy, it fits. I'm sure they have 150 tables somewhere, which they did. And that was the first thing. And the second thing is we said, actually, everyone's going to go through everything together, but we're going to design the experience that it's so compelling that people don't want to be running around. And we'll move them around every 75 minutes. Every 75 minutes, they'll move to a different table with 3 different people. So they're actually going to do that like 8 times over or whatever it was, 8 or 12 times over 2 days. And so they're actually going to get a ton of networking with each other, which they'll love. And everyone's going to have the shared experience, and we're going to have coherence where everything fits together. Mm-hmm. And honestly, it was a leap of faith at the time. There was a lot of pushback. We had to really push for it. And it ended up being the highest rated event they'd ever done. Internally, it was like a 4.7 out of 5 or something, which was unheard of for engineers. And I actually remember just like the whole room absolutely engaged, because the trick is 4 people, you can't hide. If you're in a group of 4 people, you have to actually be in the activities and pay attention, and you can pair people one way, then the other, and then the whole group together. It's just a wonderful dynamic. It's radically better than 6 and ridiculously better than 8. 8, you can't hear the whole table. So there's these little design principles of coherence, right? Digestion, and kind of shared learning as well. So instead of thinking about that, designers think about sort of selling tickets and overwhelming people. We think about kind of how do we maximize insights, right? How do we maximize attention, and how does it kind of work in the brain? And then the final thing they make wrong is basically, this will happen all the time. So I'm at an event probably every week during sort of the season, which is, spring and fall largely, but sometimes a few events a week. And I'll get to an event, I'll look at the program and I'll go, you know that people need a biological break, an hour after lunch. Like, it's not negotiable. You can't have them in a room and have a 2-hour program after lunch and not expect the entire room to use the bathroom at some time. And they're like, oh, no, we pay people really well. They're really motivated. But I'm like, okay, great. So every single time, like that's a real thing, right? People have so much more attention in the morning. Sessions can be longer, a lot less in the afternoon. They have to be shorter, to be more compelling, more activities. So it's basically biological principles like this that you can observe and design accordingly. So those are the things that people kind of get wrong, I think, is they think about the stage. They think about content, not insight. And they think about sort of trying to make it attractive instead of coherence and shared learning.
I think what's fascinating about that too is with the coherence and shared learning, it allows you to revisit ideas. And that's something that I think sometimes programmers think, oh God, let's not do that. It's going to be redundant. When in reality, if you can circle back to a topic, it actually weaves a thread that really allows for that insight.
If you're with like 200 people or 500 people, and you can go up to anyone there and say, hey, what did you think about, what Bob Johansen just said, from the Institute for the Future? What was your thoughts on it? It's like all going to a movie together. You've all got this, this shared experience together. But happy to talk about kind of some of the core design principles. But was there any questions you wanted to address?
Well, I'm looking through the comments from our audience, and Eric made a really great point that at a lot of conferences, it's actually hard to find peers to learn from among a sea of vendors. Right. And I'm just curious if you wanted to comment on that, because I think it's something that we run into a lot at other conferences.
Yeah. Look, we actually made the bold decision this year to only have practitioners, so only folks from inside organizations involved in learning and talent or management, but no other vendors or other consultants, outside folks. So it was a bold decision. It was, they say a principle isn't a principle till it costs you money. So this is clearly a principle, because we're going to have a smaller event, but we think it'll be a much more valuable event for everyone there. So this year it's practitioners only. On the platform, there'll be non-practitioners on the virtual platform, but in the in-person event, it will definitely be only practitioners, which I think will kind of raise the quality of the conversation a lot and make everyone more open and more engaged.
Right. So we've talked a lot about the design principles. I'm curious if there are other, obviously rooted in science, any other scientific things that we keep in mind when we design, the 2-day conference?
Yeah, I mean, we've experimented a lot. As you said, this is like an 18th or 19th event. And we literally go back to the drawing board every year and say, what do we keep and what do we throw out and what do we... So we've experimented every year with keeping and iterating. So it's really, really evolved and adapted. There's a couple of things that are really important to me. Like, I find you can have 4 conversations in a day with a break between. It sort of doesn't matter how long. It could be 45, it can be 75, it can be 90, but there's space for kind of 4 big conversations in a day. The way we do it is we have everyone together at the start and the end, and then tracks in between. So you've got sort of everyone together for a shared experience, and then autonomy across sort of the mid-morning and after lunch sessions. So you've got autonomy and sort of choice as to what you go to there. The 4 things and then a break is really important. I go to a lot of conferences where there's session after session after session with no break, and people basically take a break, right? Yeah. So that's been an interesting design principle. I mean, the Warren Bennis principle of digestion every 15, 20 minutes, really, really important. This year we're doing something that's sort of, it's a big experiment for us. We've done a lot of experiments over the years. About 7 years ago, we decided to do the experiment of free streaming some of the sessions. And in hindsight, it was great because it actually set us up to be ready for when we had to go virtual. It was much easier for us to go to a virtual summit than most others, because we'd had all this practice with, not just vendors, but the whole process of actually, having a streaming event. But this year we're doing a hybrid event for the first time. There's a real in-person experience in New York. and then there's a fully virtual experience for people who are watching. So it's going to be an interesting experiment to learn and sort of engage those digestion points in between. And we're going to have folks kind of helping people make sense of it online, all sorts of things. So that's interesting this year. Maybe we should talk about this year before.
Yeah, let's pause on that for a second. So I'm curious, that's like a big thing. I mean, this will be the first time there's an in-person component since 2019. Why not stay totally virtual? I mean, you know that there are plenty of benefits to being virtual. So talk us through a little bit about that hybrid decision.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And, ask me at the end of October if it was a good idea or not. I don't know yet.
Okay.
I think it'll be a good idea. I mean, the driver for it was like much deeper, richer conversations happen when it's in person. And it's not just the audience, it's also the work we put in to the sessions, the amount we care. Somehow there's just this unconscious bias about it. Maybe it's a distance bias, you'll be in front of all these people, you don't want to mess up. So the team seems to work that much harder on the research and the sessions because it's in person, and you get the quality of presenters there. And the quality of the conversations and the audience, is really powerful. And, getting to spend 2 days in person with peers is a wonderful, wonderful thing for everyone, including me, like to get to spend time with people and really meet and talk. So at the same time, the upside of virtual is, companies like, someone like Microsoft, for example, will send people from lots of different parts of the country and even parts of the world to come along and see what it is that they're doing with us. And many of our partners will have big teams, maybe the entire talent team will come to the summit virtually. Now, they won't necessarily attend every session, but they'll pick exactly the sessions they want to go. If they're in DEI, they'll come to our DEI track. If they're managing performance management, they'll come to all the sessions that are really related to that. And so the virtual has some upsides. And we're keeping, maybe I'll tell you about this year, we're keeping, there's 4 keynotes this year. We're adding back what we call the foundations sessions. So foundations are like, if you're brand new to NLI, you want to know what SCARF is, here's a quick hour on that. Here's one on seeds, bias breaking approach. Here's one on ages and learning. Here's one on insight. Here's one on psych safety, growth mindset. So kind of the big ideas that make up our work with foundation sessions. We still have the from the lab sessions, which are I love them. They get mixed reviews. Some people want them to be really practical, but they're literally about what's coming out of the labs now. If you're really interested in that, and they're quite well attended, but it's literally what's new and fascinating coming out of research on different particular topics. So there's a from the lab track. There's our breakthroughs track where we're presenting new research, new findings in a bunch of areas. And then we're also doing
trends too.
And trends, the trends happening. And then we have a case study track, called From the Field, so you can hear about organizations using the work. And then a user insights track as well, looking at getting a bit deeper into how do you do measurement? How do you make, solutions compelling and kind of more shared learning? So a lot going on in the keynotes, a lot of big topics. The opening session's called Irreconcilable Differences. And it's looking at the whole power struggle between employer, employee, and what's happening this year and what the future might bring, and some really thoughtful conversations there. We have a big session on DEI that's looking at kind of how do you zeitgeist proof your DEI strategy, and how do you really make sure it anchors on the right things and thrives. We have Kenji Yoshino joining us, who's a phenomenal thinker in the DEI space. Also happens to be a lawyer who really thinks a lot about obviously the legal things happening at the moment. And then we have a big session on AI, of course, but from a human capital perspective, what does it mean for HR leaders and for managing people and developing leaders and all this? I think you'll find that a fascinating session. And then a big one on learning and accelerating learning and kind of how we think about that. So those are kind of the big themes overall.
That's great. Audience, I want to turn to you. You've heard a little bit about our preview about some of our keynotes. What are some of the topics you'd like to incorporate in Summit? What are you curious to hear about? Pop them in the chat as we keep talking. David, we've talked about the programming. We've talked about the keynotes. Let's pull back a little bit and talk about this year's theme. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, folks, Summit is happening October 4th and 5th. It's hybrid, as David said, in New York City, downtown, in the financial district, and then obviously online. So David, tell us about this year's theme and why it's so important.
Yeah, I know we struggle with the theme a lot. every year, and it's funny. Last year our theme was adapt faster, and I thought our theme this year should be adapt even faster, because things were just changing kind of even more, right? And just things accelerating even more. But we've gone with a theme. The theme is recalibrate, and recalibrate says, a lot has changed, and you shouldn't just automatically cut and paste the way you're doing things in the past, right? So recalibrate, like reset. And a lot of organizations are doing this. They're recalibrating their whole approach to leadership, what leaders should do, what their role is, how personal should they be, how much should they do their own work versus just manage. And so the whole question of leadership is being recalibrated. Cultures are being recalibrated. Performance management is being recalibrated. Recalibrated for what? Well, recalibrated for a post-pandemic era when some form of hybrid is here to stay for many, many organizations. And we will address, by the way, the research on a hybrid. We've done a pretty good meta-analysis on what we think is really happening, help you make sense of the data. But obviously the post-pandemic era is here, the AI era is here, an era of continued uncertainty in the world is here. So with all these things going on, how do we recalibrate not just our DEI strategy, but our performance strategy, our leadership strategy, our people strategy, all of it. So that's the overall theme, and I think it's really relevant. It's super relevant to the time today.
Thank you so much for your comments, folks. It looks like the SCARF model is something that folks are very interested in hearing more about. Andra also mentions being interested in frameworks like Seek, Speak, and Listen implemented in companies. We will have lots of those case studies and the stories of their impact in our From the Field sessions. So please, be on the lookout for that. I'm also curious, as we're chatting here, audience members, you hear about how we design things. I'm curious, when you've been to conferences that you've really loved, were there certain things that stuck with you, or anything that we should be considering as, we continue to evolve our design that you liked?
Oh, what a great question. What do you love out there that other people do that we should?
Yeah, let us know. So please put that in the chat as we keep chatting. David, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about too is I know we spend a lot of time thinking about the panel makeup. Can you talk to us a little bit about the importance of getting all perspectives on stage to really, debate, go at it, discuss and hash out a lot of things? I think sometimes at conferences, you don't get as many perspectives and you hear more of oh yeah, what she said, that sounded good.
Yeah. I mean, we love a good argument, with our academic roots, we love a good debate and things. So, we literally want people to kind of debate topics, right? So you'll get a scientist talking about the importance of science, a leadership expert talking about how does that work, or how does that, and so it's a really integrative thing. So we want different brains like debating, and we work really hard to get all kinds of diversity on stage. Sometimes it's really, really hard. There's some challenges in that area in terms of the practitioners that are out there, but across gender and race and age and also country, like we don't just want North American presenters. So we try really, really hard, and it's a every single session, every time we work on the summit, we're pushing on that. So we do our best in that realm. But it is really important. You get so many fantastic insights when you get really different brains together, not just all big companies, not just all North American companies, not just all of a certain caliber of person. So it's an interesting challenge and an ongoing one. I look back to our first summit in Asolo in northern Italy, and we were super proud of it at the time. And a few years later, we looked back and we went, oh, look at that, 4 white middle-aged men on stage, for 4 days telling the audience about stuff. We're like, oh, didn't really see that at the time. So sometimes these things happen.
Awesome. We're getting some great feedback in the chat. Thank you, folks. Jackie is saying, interactivity with the audience and getting ideas and concepts to sink in really is what, makes a conference worth it. Andrea is saying to see, other events, graphical recordings of sessions, like a wrap up of a session to remember the better content. Do you want to chat a little bit about how, one of the unique things I think we do is that we keep our content available for a fairly significant amount of time after the summit. Do you want to talk a little bit through that, David?
Yeah, I think so. And then, I mentioned at the start, we'll probably do it earlier, a shorter session today is less to talk about, let people get back to their day. But I think, this is one of the challenges we had in designing the tracks, right? So, you'll all be together at the start of day one, and then you'll have a quick break, right? And you can talk to others and network, and then come back together, and you can choose from 3 or 4 different tracks at that time. And people are always like, oh my God, but I want to go to that one. I want to go to that one. And so we record them, which is not simple or cheap, and then make them available for months and months afterwards to the participants who are there. And then also to corporate members. So if you're a corporate member, you can access that, ongoingly, which, by the way, means if you're a corporate member, you can go back in and watch any of the sessions from any of literally 18 or 19 summits. There's some incredible ones in there. So that's something that we do just to kind of minimize that FOMO and get the best, make the best choices kind of on site. But, I would encourage you to be there if you can. The virtual summit is amazing, gives you flexibility, but it's an incredible opportunity to really go deep and take 2 days to reflect. The thing I'm most proud of at the summit is we ask people at the end to rate the insights that they've had on the Eureka scale, right? And 5 on the Eureka scale, it's a scale we developed. A 5 is something you'll remember your whole life, right? And you wouldn't expect many 5s at a conference, right? But a 4 is something you really, really like, you're almost 100% sure you're going to act on. Like, you're so motivated. It's absolutely like you've already sent emails to everyone and it's happening. So a level 4 insight. And a level 3 is like, useful, interesting, helpful. You might do something, but you might forget it as well, right? Like in 6 months, you might have forgotten what it was. But you won't forget a level 4 in 6 months. It's really alive. Anyway, so we ask people, and amazingly, out of, and the event used to be more like 800 or so people, but, out of 800 people, we'd actually have a few dozen level 5s in the audience, like really life-changing insights. And we would have hundreds of level 4s, hundreds and hundreds of level 4s. Most people, in fact, some or many level 4 insights, which is super, super rewarding. And that for me is the goal of the event. It's the strongest possible insight. And really giving people that experience of seeing the world differently through research. So, we're excited about it. I'll just say we're going to be launching a few new things. We're going to be launching our digital solutions there, which is a way of completely asynchronously taking our modules like Grow, Decide, Include, etc., and scale it across, the whole organization. We're also going to be releasing something I'm super excited about, which is our 6-month leadership solution that gives people a new habit every week for 6 months, covering all the essentials, not exhaustive, all the essential things if you wanted to really lead with the brain in mind. It's a big project we've been working on for some time. So we'll be launching Lead there and a few other things. So any closing comments?
Yeah. Let's leave it there. Let's let folks get back. We'll be sharing a quick poll for you all. So as a reminder, summit tickets are live, both for in-person and virtual. Please keep an eye on the chat where you will see links for that. Again, it's October 4th and 5th in New York City. We would love to see you in person or online. Thank you so much for sharing this Friday with us. And we hope that we can dig into more Your Brain at Work lives and see you at our summit. Thanks so much.
And just a closing comment, this is a great time. I think someone put in the chat, it's a great time to get corporate membership because then your company pays for your ticket. Tickets to the summit come as part of membership. So if you're not a corporate member, it's actually not that expensive. Your whole talent team gets access to the content and a few people get access to the summit. So take a look at that if you're not already part of it. Thanks so much, Alyssa, for the great conversation. And thanks, everyone. Hope to see you in New York in October in a couple of months. Bye-bye.
Everyone. Bye.